Welcome back to the channel that's got the BRAP. We're going to discuss the differences, or at least some of the mild differences, between the late model 13B rotor housing and the 20B 3-rotor rotor housing. And are they interchangeable? If you're trying to use 13B parts in your 20B, what do you need to know? All right, so welcome back. Thanks for watching. Like I said, we're going to discuss some of the differences of the 20B rotor housings versus 13B rotor housings. Now, a lot of people always want to know, are 13B parts interchangeable with 3-rotor 20B parts? And the late model FD3S rotor housings or late model turbo rotor housings from the 89 to 91 Series 5 Turbo 2 also have the same exhaust timing and basic port timing. Although the FD3S is a better choice for a couple reasons. When you get down to it, it's not a direct replacement. There are some differences that you need to know about. The factory 20B rotor housing had this unique exhaust sleeve, and it does affect the port shape slightly. So if you're replacing one 20B rotor housing with a 13B housing, there are some notable differences. If you are able to swap the sleeve out, which you can do, you pull the pins out and put the new sleeve or replacement turbo sleeve in, it's pretty easy to take a 20B and make it like a 13B for better exhaust flow, or vice versa if you're trying to keep the factory 20B sleeve, which my understanding is based on noise cancellation and potentially EGR, but I think it's mainly noise cancellation. But if you look on the inside, you can see that it's actually scooping some air, and I believe some of that air is then brought into the EGR, because in its factory trim, the 20Bs, the Cosmo 3-rotor sedans, did have emissions. They weren't always meant to be a race motor. But when we're turning them into race motors, we'll often take and put in the late model 13B sleeves or turbo sleeves to optimize exhaust flow. And vice versa, if you're using 13B parts in a 20B, considering your exhaust sleeve choice or keeping exhaust sleeves matched throughout the motor is important. You wouldn't want to end up with a 13B sleeve and two 20B sleeves or something like that. You don't want to mismatch your port flow. And like I mentioned, because the 20B does have a little bit of an extra chamfer in here, generally this is more proper, or you're able to get away with it in the case where you're doing porting anyways, because the bottom edge of your turbo sleeve doesn't quite fill the gap. But I've never seen a performance issue. You know, I'm not getting down to the horsepowers, like 1 horsepower, 2 horsepower. Obviously, it's better to have that better fitment through your 13B, so a lot of customers will opt to actually put 93 RX7 turbo rotor housings into their 20B as a performance option. Versus the 20B plates, but just let it be known that the 20B rotor housing, sorry, I think I called it a plate, 20B rotor housings are still available. Not every single one of them, but you can get 20B housing, so you can still build a 20B labeled motor. Now, one of the reasons I talk about using the 13B rotor housing or FD3S rotor housing as an option for performance enhancement over the 20B, if you're not worried about the labeling or the exhaust sleeve, EGR, things like that, is the late model FD housings actually had a deeper cut around your spark plugs, and this got the water closer to the spark face, which helped protect against cracking or overheat concentration in this area, which can lead to expansion, shrinking, and excessive wear across this area. One of the reasons sometimes you'll see that streaking or excessive wear is concentrated heat causes it to expand, and that ends up causing more pressure on the center portion of the apex seal through this ignition and compression area. So factory Mazda housings from 93 to 95 or up to 99, depending on where you are in the world, actually had a back cut. And that's very similar to what racers were doing for a long time by doing water cooling modification. Getting in there and cutting this area, causing heat sink grooves, or just a little bit of digging to get water closer to either the spark plug or the heat concentration areas on the surface of the rotor housing. So most of the time, if you do see cracking, that's due to excessive heat concentration. And that can be relative to spark plug choice, relative to how the motor was being used, driven, maintained, and the tune, depending on its performance and in what condition it was being operated. So in a lot of my personal 20Bs, I end up opting for the FD3S rotor housings. But that does also require machining sometimes. This 20B actually from the factory has a larger hole. It's got two larger holes for the factory large tension bolts. Factory 20Bs actually have two larger, I believe they're 12 millimeter tension bolts that run from the back forward, and then shorties that run from the forward back. Now, not every 20B had these from what I've seen, but the majority of them did. So the factory 20B housings are still cast and machined, and I know it's hard to tell, I'm moving around a lot, with these larger holes. So if you're building a 20B with 13B housings, you must consider the exhaust sleeves, and you must consider the fact that you might need to expand two of your holes. Otherwise, you'd run into tension bolt fitment issues. Now, when we're building motors, generally, if we're swapping in a 13B rotor housing, that means it's a performance motor, which means it's getting studding, which means we're going through every tension bolt hole and converting it to an oversized studded motor. So it's one of the reasons we consider the 13B replacement more of a performance option versus a direct bolt-in. But like the cast iron plates from the FDs or Cosmos, they can be modified with minor machine work or port matching or exhaust sleeve matching to be used in 3-rotor or 20B motors. Now, it's always nice to use factory parts. If it's a restoration project, if it's a factory rebuild, non-modified, non-performance, use factory rotor housings, use factory apex seals, use factory parts. But if you're going for performance, if you're going for racing, if you're going for enhanced flow, there's a lot of options. Get those turbo sleeves in there, or opt for a 13B late model housing. You can get away with using the Series 4 turbos or the Series 4 NA, but they've also got a noise canceling exhaust sleeve, which isn't going to help your flow. And the Series 4 rotor housings have a different spark plug timing. So if you were to use Series 4 any rotor housings, turbo or NA, you've got to keep them grouped together, like you need to keep Series 5 and FD and 20B housings grouped together, because they're all of the same spark plug timing. All right, I think that was a lot of information. That one ended up being a little more in-depth than I expected. I always think of this stuff as very minor. You know, we drill a couple holes, we swap an exhaust sleeve, a little porting, bada bing, bada boom, 13B housing and a 20B. But it's probably not a normal garage performance operation. But if anybody ever needs help with exhaust sleeves, we sell the pins. A lot of times we even have used sleeves on the site, and we can get titanium replacement aftermarket. And we're always happy to do any of the service work we talk about in the videos. Just feel free to reach out to KMR or Mazda Tricks. And a big shout out to Mazda Tricks, because they're the ones that actually let us borrow these brand new parts, brand new 20B housing, brand new FD3S housing, available from KMR, available from Mazda Tricks. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate the growth of the channel and the questions that come in. And we're always happy to discuss rotaries, because we love the brap. I think that's a brap. That's a wrap. That's a brap. I'm out of here. Back to work. Thanks for watching.